so it is just about 7:04 or so. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm gathering that more people are probably going to join us, and I'll just let them in as they arrive. But I want to welcome everybody and thanks for being here. This is actually our first cooking program that we've done as a virtual program. So super excited to see you all here. Um, and I want to introduce you to tonight's guest presenter. And before I do that, I'll just mention that we're going to be doing another one of these cooking classes with Colin coming up next month. Currently, we've got them scheduled for the fourth Thursday evening of the month. So it's going to be the 25th of February, again at 7 p.m. And that one is on how to unprocess your plate. So that one is going to be especially interesting and relevant as we move into the new year and try to eat healthier. Um, so it'll be up on the website and on the newsletter that we send out each week as it gets closer. But if you have any questions and any details, just let me know and I can get you set up with that. So now I would like to introduce tonight's presenter is Colin McCullough. Since Colin became vegan in 1995, he's been finding new ways to make healthy eating convenient and delicious, especially while raising his two boys with healthy appetites. Colin had his first cookbook. It's called the Healthy Vegan Cookbook, and I believe I spied it on the counter behind him there. That one came out
Right.
in 2019. And his brand new one, Smoothies That Taste Like Girl Scout Cookies, was just released this past October. Colin teaches private and public cooking classes throughout New England, sharing his experience and recipes with people who want to incorporate more whole food, plant based meals for health, compassion, and the environment. You can find him, his cookbooks, and more information at his website, colincooksvegan.com. And I'll put that in the chat in a moment for anyone who wants to navigate over there and check that out. And I would like to welcome Colin McCullough. Hey, Colin.
All right. Hey, thanks so much for having me. So I teach a lot of cooking classes at different libraries throughout New England. And, this class, the Healthy Soups class, this is really one that I wish more than the other ones that I could really be there in person to be able to, be able to cook with everybody and be able to hand out samples because, some of these soups that we're going to do today, these are ones that, using healthy whole food ingredients, you just wouldn't believe how good it tastes. Really, it's amazing. So, this is of course perfect soup weather right now, nice and cold out. So, whether I am here at home or if I am at work, I'll take a pint of soup with me, and it's just the absolute perfect lunch. Um, so, as you said, Andy, I've been vegan for about 25 years now, and really what started me kind of down this path as far as the cooking goes is, I have the two boys who are now 18 and 21, unbelievably so. And it's one thing for me to try and eat healthy, but for my kids, to try and get them to eat kale and whole foods and whole grains and things like that, they love Oreos as much as the next kid, so I have to try to entice them with food that they're really gonna like. And so anytime that I could get them to eat healthy food and ask for seconds, then that was a real win for me, and I would really star those recipes, keep working on recipes like that. So the Healthy Vegan Cookbook, that's really kind of the thrust behind that is. Um, trying to find as many different ways to eat whole foods, healthy, fresh whole foods, incorporate that as much into your diet as possible. I believe the USDA recommendation for fruits and vegetables every day is about 4 to 5 servings a day. Probably not a surprise that almost nobody gets that. Most people like don't even get two a day. So, part of the what I do with the cookbook is trying to have those healthy whole foods in as many different forms as possible, whether they're smoothies or soups or um, different kinds of salads. There are 30 different smoothies in the cookbook. That's usually what I have for breakfast. So right in the beginning of the day, start the day with something really healthy that's going to give me a lot of energy. and then, just kind of continue that throughout the day. Uh, so we're going to do three soup recipes for tonight. Just so you know the format of it. So I'm going to go ahead and put all the ingredients together, blend everything. We'll talk about it. I can talk about the different ingredients I'm going to use, but I'm not actually going to cook the soups tonight, not being able to serve them in person. You don't need to see me actually cook it. So I'll put everything in the pot and then I'll go ahead and cook it after. And unfortunately, can't share it with everybody. But it's gonna be lunch for me for like a week. So, and me and my wife. So that's fantastic. All right. So, uh, also just want to point out, star of the show, as usual in all my classes, is the Vitamix. You can see that here. You don't need a Vitamix. It's just a Vitamix is a really high power blender. It's also tends to be pretty expensive. So, you don't have to have one of these. You can use like a Ninja or a NutriBullet or, something like that if you have that. Um, I definitely recommend a powerful blender to be able to make all these different recipes. I use, of all of the appliances that I use in my kitchen, this one I use multiple times a day, every day, for soups and smoothies and sauces and, so many different things. So of all the different appliances, I swear, if this broke right now, I would go to Target after the class and buy another one because I just use it so often. So, you can definitely find them used on eBay, at Craigslist. You can get them refurbished from Vitamix. Wish I was paid by Vitamix to say all this. I can be bought. It's okay. But unfortunately, no. I'm small time here. All right. So this first recipe we're going to do is creamy tomato soup. So, this one is a perfect example of the difference between, using whole food healthy ingredients and what you're going to get out of a can. Um, the best and weirdest compliment I ever got for one of my soup recipes was for this, where um, somebody in one of my classes said, it actually tastes like what it is, which is, if you think about it, it's a really bizarre compliment, but tomato soup from a can, what does it even taste like? It doesn't taste like tomatoes, it tastes good, I guess, but it doesn't taste like fresh tomatoes. So that's what we're going to load this up with here. So first ingredient in the recipe, 7 tomatoes. I've cut them up already. Another benefit of doing these online is you don't have to sit there and watch me have to cut everything up in the front of the class. Everything's already prepared. So one thing I want to point out here, I use the vine tomatoes. So you see those beefsteak tomatoes, those big red tomatoes in the supermarket, pass them right by because those just taste like plastic. They smell like plastic. You hold up those vine tomatoes and they smell so ripe and fresh. They smell so great. So uh, I'm going to put in 7. I just kind of rough chop these. So again, letting the blender do all the work for you. That's why it's really important. It's really helpful to have a very powerful blender that's going to take care of these. So I'm going to put in about half, maybe about 5 of the tomatoes in here, just so I don't overload it. I'm just going to kind of do it in 2 batches here. So another benefit with the fresh tomatoes here is you don't really have to add much water for this recipe because there's already so much liquid from the tomatoes. Also, one thing I want to point out is, having the blender do the work. So if you look up traditional recipes for tomato soup, then they'll tell you, you should take the seeds out, you should, peel the tomatoes. That's where all the nutrition is. So, coming from sort of a whole food, healthy whole foods perspective, you want that nutrition in there. So, having a powerful blender like a Vitamix is just going to blend those seeds and everything in there. It's not going to be gritty or grainy or anything like that. So it really helps to have that powerful blender. If you have a Ninja or a NutriBullet, then you can just blend it longer, and it's really going to blend, those seeds and everything in there. So, I always kind of make a joke that I'm kind of a lazy cook. Um, and a big part of, my the way that I get around that is the appliances do the work for me. So I just kind of rough chop everything, put it in the blender, and the blender does all the work. I don't have to sit here and chop all day. So I'm going to put in next a medium yellow onion. And you see, I just kind of rough chop that again. There we go. And I put in a medium carrot. And just like I was saying about the tomatoes, don't peel that. So much of the nutrition in carrots is in the peel. So I'm going to leave that in. Just make sure it's nice and washed. And then 4 cloves of garlic. You can put more if you're braver, but 4 cloves is going to taste great there. And I put in about a half a cup of raw cashews. You see that here. So I don't like to use any salted or roasted nuts in different recipes that I make. I like to use the raw as much as possible because it's really closest to what your body knows what to do with. I put cashews in this because normally it calls for a lot of oil in this recipe. And I don't actually really use any oil in cooking that I do in the Healthy Vegan Cookbook. There are a couple of recipes that use some toasted sesame seed oil just for a little bit of that taste. But otherwise, I don't use oil. And the reason why is oil is just pure liquid fat, it's pure calories. It's the most calorically dense thing that you can possibly eat. Coming from a whole foods perspective, trying to have things that are healthier and easier for your body to be able to know what to do with. Oil is kind of it's one of those things that, your body doesn't really know how to process that because it's so stripped down and it's processed, versus using nuts like the cashews. It's going to blend right in. It's going to help really make the soup really creamy, but you're not going to have nearly the amount of calories and the fat that you would from using oil. So I'm just going to add, let's see, 1 cup of water to that.
Oh, we have a couple questions here from the group
You
about
bet.
the tomato soup. One is Bonnie wants to know, what's your opinion of using frozen tomatoes that you grew, so like frozen that you grew in your garden and froze?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
And Mike has a question, any good alternatives to the cashews for someone with nut allergies?
Sure. So there are a couple of different things you could use. In terms of sources of fat that your body knows what to do with, but doesn't have a really strong taste, you could use tahini instead. So it's like a sesame seed paste, and that doesn't really have a very strong taste to it, especially if you're going to blend it into, this much liquid. So you could use that. Um, you can use oats. Actually, oats kind of have some fat. Like if you have oat milk, it's nice and creamy because there's some fat in the oats. So you could use that if you wanted to. Alternative to that is actually an ingredient that we're going to use in one of the upcoming soups, which is coconut manna, and I will talk more about that a little bit later. But basically, coconut manna is just pureed coconut, so that it's uh, pureed until the point that it's just like a cream, just like you would do with, peanuts that you process, put in a food processor until it becomes peanut butter. Coconut manna is the same. So that you could use coconut manna, but it's going to kind of give it a bit of a coconut taste to it. So those would be some alternatives for you.
And
All
one
right.
more question from Kira. She's wondering about using a Cuisinart food processor or using an immersion blender once the soup is cooked.
I would not use a food processor to do this. Food processors are really great at chopping things, at chopping solid things, but when it comes to liquid, it tends to start spilling if you put very much in it. I have used a food processor when I had nothing else and I was cooking at somebody else's house, and it works, but you just make sure you don't put very much in it because it'll kind of spill out, the middle and start to spill out the sides. So you can make a mess with it real fast. I know because I did. All right. Also want to add, let's see, I have 1 teaspoon of salt and then half a teaspoon of black pepper. I'm gonna add that in. And if you don't do salt, then of course, that's optional. That's just gonna kind of boost up the taste a little bit. Also, another ingredient I want to point out, like I like to use For a healthy whole food sweetener, it is dates, medjool dates. So I don't, just like the oil, I don't really use any forms of sugar. Um, you know, really so many of the different sugars that you can buy, sweeteners, are really just stripped down and processed versions of something that used to be healthy, but not really so much, when it's been processed. But medjool dates are really one of the only healthy forms of sweetener. There's all the fiber in here in the date, so nothing's been stripped away, and so it's much different for your body than any other processed kind of sugar, because it doesn't spike your blood sugar like any other kind of sugar is going to. So I'll put that in. It really kind of helps to offset the tartness of the tomatoes here. So I'm going to go ahead and blend this up just for a minute. And this is a great reason to um, be able to do this online, because you can all mute if you want to. You don't have to listen to this blender that makes a lot of noise. This was always great with my kids when they were younger. Make a smoothie in the morning, and who needs an alarm clock? This thing just loud, wakes them right up. So, all right, so I'm just gonna do this, and if anybody has any questions or comments, then now's a great time to throw it in the chat, and then I'll make my noise here. All right. So you'll notice that when I put the cover on, before I start it, I hold it down, just like any blender. You want to make sure the cover is on tight. I have a new kitchen here, and I do not want it all over my ceiling. Do not want to paint my ceiling with my food. So I make sure that, especially with the Vitamix, because it's very powerful, it will coat your ceiling. So, all right. So I still have the rest of the tomatoes. I just need to blend that up real quick. There we go. And one more minute here. All right. So like I said, this is gonna just pulverize all of the seeds and the skin and everything in it. So this is gonna be a really creamy soup. You're not gonna get bits of any of the seeds or anything like that. It's gonna blend it in really nicely. So I'm just gonna pour the rest of that in there. Now, as far as the recipe goes, the last thing is going to be calling for some sprigs of thyme. So I have some of the fresh thyme that I got at the grocery store. And I'm just going to put in, I'd say 5, but you can put in a handful. So this is really going to add a really nice flavor to it. And then when it's all done, you can just kind of fish out the thyme stems from there. So you can see, so this is a really kind of bright orange color right now. Um, that's the color it is right now because it's raw. But then once you cook it, let's see, my own recipe, I should know this. So I cook for about 30 minutes because you really want to cook this so that you don't have that raw taste. There's onions, there's a lot of garlic in here, there's the tomatoes. You really want to cook this for about a half an hour. So it's really going to blend all of those flavors together, and you're not going to have any raw taste of all that. And as it cooks, it changes from this kind of bright orange color to a darker orange slash red kind of color. Um, Sometimes if you see soups that are really super red, it's because they add food coloring to it. They cheat. Fresh tomatoes are gonna have like a reddish kind of orange color to it. One more thing I want to mention with this, uh, the last thing is, so you cook it for 30 minutes, you remove the thyme sprigs from there, and you want to add a little pinch. You want to add a pinch or a couple pinches of baking soda. So this is the baking soda. So this is not the baking soda from your refrigerator. Do not use this box that's been sitting in the back that absorbs all of the smells and everything in your refrigerator. Do not use that for this recipe because you don't want your soup to taste like that. It's awful. So there we go. In a bag, in my pantry, have a dedicated baking soda. Don't cheat and use the stuff in your fridge. All right. So also wanted to point out with this recipe too, I had called for a teaspoon of salt in this. If you don't want to use salt, then you don't have to. Salt is sort of an acquired um, taste. So you have a sensitivity to it, and if you don't use salt anymore, if you start cutting back, you're going to become a lot more sensitive to it. So you don't need as much anymore. So for health reasons, if you don't want to use salt, you can definitely cut way back and then stop having it. And after a while, you don't even really notice that there's no salt in it. If you do, this is the brand that I like to use, Redmond Real Salt. So this is a flavor, or this is a salt that you can buy at Whole Foods. It's kind of more of a specialty ingredient. This actually comes from a salt bed out in the Midwest. So technically it's sea salt, but it's millions of years old. This has the highest nutrient content of any salts on the market. It's got a really nice flavor to it. So, this bag cost me about $10, I think, at Whole Foods. And I mean, it takes months and months for me to use this. So if you're going to use salt, then I say spend a little bit of money and get something really high quality, and it's going to just taste fantastic. So there's that. So I'm going to go ahead and move this soup over, move the pan over, and we can start with the next recipe in just a minute. Once again, if anybody has any questions or comments or anything, then now's a good time while I'm kind of rinsing everything out and getting ready for the next one.
Colin, Marianne wants to know if you can eat the soup cold, if it tastes good cold.
You could. This is not a recipe, though, that I would recommend that you have raw. It would taste, cooking this would certainly make it taste very different than if you had it raw. But you could have it cold, sure. Yep. On a cold winter day, though, you want it to be hot. All right. So I'm gonna move this stuff over. Put that away here. Excuse me. During the day, you can see the river in the windows behind me, but it's too dark out for that. All right, so the next recipe that we're gonna do is Lebanese red lentil soup. So, lentils are one of those things that, if you see it in magazines and articles and the newspaper, you should eat more lentils, eat more pulses. They're really good for you. They're, super nutritious. But, so much of the time when people think of lentils, they think of like the kind of thick brown lentils that, it makes a really hearty soup. But, when they say you should have lentils all the time, well, how much of those chunky brown lentils do you really want to have? So this is an alternative to that. These are also very, very nutritious. I use the pink lentils with these. So that's the traditional lentil to use for this recipe for Lebanese red lentil soup. All right, so I'm gonna use the blender for some of this recipe, and then we'll go ahead and put the rest in the pot and combine it all. So first thing we're gonna do is put in 4 cups of water. It calls for 6 overall, but I'll do 4 so I don't overload the blender. And then add another 2 cups into the saucepan. So there's 4 cups of water here. Right, and then with that, we have the 1/3 of a cup of cashews. You don't have to use specifically cashews. The reason I like to use them is that as a nut, they're pretty soft, so unlike almonds that are kind of harder and, it kind of has a pulp to it. Cashews are really soft. They just blend right in. If you didn't have a powerful blender, you could just you could soak the cashews ahead of time. It kind of helps to make them a little bit softer as well. Fun fact with cashews, even raw cashews are not really raw because if you had raw cashews, they're actually poisonous. So they do cook them a little bit just to get the poison out so that we can enjoy them and not get sick. So fun fact. All right, and then there's the medium onion. And again, the reason that I'm using the cashews is to make this a really creamy base to the soup, right? Because normally Lebanese red lentil soup calls for a fair amount of olive oil specifically. Um, and, people say, well, olive oil is healthy. It's still 100% fat. It's just liquid calories. And if you can, use something like the nuts, which have a lot less fat, a lot less calories to it, and it gives it the same kind of consistency, the same, really creamy consistency. So, you get the same consistency, but not using, all of those extra calories, then why not? I say. All right. So we're going to put in a clove of the garlic here. I put in a small carrot. So, just like in the tomato soup recipe, you just break it into pieces, let the blender do all the rest. And then I'm going to add 2 green olives, you see here. So as far as trying to address, like, olive oil really gives things of specific taste, and part of that is it does taste a little bit like olives, of course, coming from olive oil. So I have the cashews that I'm going to blend in. That's going to give it the creaminess, and I'm going to add a couple of the green olives, and this just gives it a really faint flavor of olives, just like you have with the olive oil. So I'm trying to recreate the benefits of it without having all of those extra, the fat and the calories there. I'm going to go ahead and blend this together. All right, I don't need to blend that for very long. So there's the liquid ingredients there, and then I'm just going to add the next 2 cups of water to that, because there have to be 6 overall, because I say so, because it's my recipe. Um, by the way, all of these recipes are in the Healthy Vegan Cookbook, and I have a whole chapter that are different healthy whole food soups. All right. So to this, I'm going to add the 2 cups of the pink lentils. One thing that's really great with pink lentils is they're much smaller and they cook much faster. So regular, those brown lentils, you really have to cook them for a long time. Or if you put them in a pressure cooker, they'll cook faster. But these in a pressure cooker, these will cook in like 5 minutes, real fast. Um, and they really break down in a soup, so it really kind of blends into the soup, really breaks down. So there's the 2 cups of the uncooked lentils, and I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of fresh chopped parsley and 1 tablespoon of chopped mint. So of all of the things to substitute, I would say, you know, if you can get those herbs at the grocery store, you could find parsley at any store, but if you can find some fresh mint, using the fresh herbs here really makes such a difference. It's going to taste so much better with the fresh herbs. So I've chopped that up and put that in here. Right. And the next thing I'm going to add is a couple of tablespoons of bouillon. So this is definitely optional. I just like the flavor that this adds. So, you have powdered bouillon, you have the bouillon cubes, you have, like the liquid stock bouillon that you buy. This is better than bouillon, and this is a paste. a paste style. And so this is, you can use any of those others if you want. I just really like the taste of the Better Than Bouillon that it provides. So um, you can use this, or you can just leave it out. It's not it's not critical, but I'll put in about 2 tablespoons. And this also adds some salt to it as well. So there we go. There's the 2 tablespoons. The next there's a blend of different spices and things I'm putting in. So there's 1 teaspoon of powdered um, ground cumin here. That's really essential to the taste of this one. There's also a teaspoon of salt. And then there's a 1/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper I'm putting in. So that's all together here. And also 1 teaspoon of turmeric as well. So that really helps to make it the nice yellow color. But also, of course, turmeric has so many great health benefits. It's one of those things that you really just can't get enough of it. If you can find 100 different ways to get it in your diet, then that's great. So I'm gonna mix all this together. And like I said, I'll do all the cooking after the class. This is one where usually when I'm teaching it in a class, I use a pressure cooker to cook it just so that it can kind of speed things up. And so then everybody gets to sample this. And oh man, when I open this up at the end and people, you smell the herbs together and oh, it smells so fantastic. So I'm sorry I can't share that with you, but this is going to make a fantastic lunch for my wife and me the next week. Also, one thing I want to point out. So um, this one you would cook for about 30 minutes on medium low. If you have the pressure cooker, it's going to be much, much faster, about 5 minutes. But this one, you cook for about 30 minutes. Those pink lentils are just going to kind of dissolve into the soup. If you wanted it to be, really, really creamy, then you could use an immersion blender, like a stick blender, and just kind of, blend in those lentils a little bit more. But they really kind of do break down. Um, Also, the recipe calls for the juice of 1 lemon, which I have here. Um, in this recipe, I really prefer to put it in right at the end. If you use lemon juice in the recipe like here and you cook it for 30 minutes, so much of that lemon juice is going to cook off. It's going to boil off. So you really want, all of that flavor um, to still be in there. So I leave this until the end and just put it in right at the end. So I will move this one over and we will work on our last recipe here. Get this out of the way. All right. So the last recipe we're going to do is the fragrant coconut Thai soup. So this one is a little bit more involved than the other recipes, just that it just has more ingredients to it. Has a couple specialty ingredients. We can talk about those as they come up. Let me just rinse this off here. Andy, we have any questions or comments or anything at this point?
I think we are caught up on the questions at the
Right.
moment.
Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and move right into the third recipe then. So fragrant coconut Thai soup. This is a traditional recipe, and I've sort of put my whole food spin on it. I mean, just like with the Lebanese red lentil soup, obviously I did not make that up. It's a very traditional soup, but my approach is trying to make it healthy, whole foods as much as possible, and try not to use very many processed ingredients in that. So it makes such a difference in terms of the taste of it to use those fresh ingredients, and it's so much more nutritious for you than anything that you're going to get in a can. You get that can of tomato soup, who knows how long that soup has been on the shelf? Probably a really long time, who knows? But this is fresh. All right, so this one is going to be just like the red lentil soup. We're going to blend part of it and then we'll add the fresh ingredients to that. So for the first one here, I'm gonna do 4 cups of water as the base. So I'll pour that in here. And then we have the 2 cloves of garlic here and also 2 medium shallots. So you might see shallots in the supermarket over near the onions. I wonder what you do with these. Shallots are a very mild type of onion. They have a taste that's sort of like a cross between garlic and regular onions, but like they're pretty mild. So I like the flavor that it adds here. So I'll put those in. I'm gonna do we're gonna go back to the coconut manna again here. So uh, it's the Nativa brand that I like to get. I use this a lot also in desserts as well, in the healthy whole food desserts classes and recipes that I do. Um, so again, from a healthy whole food perspective, coconut manna is a great example of this, where coconut itself is a very, very healthy thing you can eat. If you were stuck on a desert island and all you could eat was coconuts, you would live for months. You would probably get really tired of coconuts though. So coconut manna is just pureed coconut. So you start with something healthy, for coconut, and then like when they make coconut oil, they extract it, they pull all the fiber out, they process it to a point where you've taken something that's actually really healthy and made it really pretty unhealthy. Um, it's a very processed and extracted product, whereas coconut manna is just pure coconut. So I am going to add, let's see, called for about half a cup. So um, coconut manna, I get this at Whole Foods. This is about $10 a bottle, but I really don't go through it that quickly. I might buy like 3 bottles. It's shelf stable, so you can just keep it in the pantry. And I'll buy like 3 of these, and I'll be good for months and months. So put in about a half a cup there. You put in more or less depending on what you want. It is pretty solid at room temperature, so if you throw it in the microwave, then it's really gonna help to soften it up quite a bit. Also, I found this at Ocean State Job Lot as well, bizarrely, randomly. Sometimes you can find them in places like that, or maybe Martin's. Maybe be lucky enough to find it at Martin's as well. All right, so next ingredient we're going to put in is some ginger. So you have some options here. The recipe calls for Thai ginger, which is called galangal. Um, you probably would never, or not likely you would ever see that in a regular supermarket. It really is more of a specialty ingredient. Uh, Thai ginger, the galangal, tastes very, very different from regular ginger, root ginger that we know. You can usually find galangal at a Asian supermarket. What I usually do is I just order it online. I get it on eBay. People will just sell like a hand-sized root of it, and so you get that, through the mail. They usually pack it in a little, cooler, some ice or something, and then you can cut that into like 1 inch pieces, 2 inch pieces. Put it in the freezer, and it lasts for a really long time in the freezer. So you definitely don't have to find it fresh. Um, Galangal has really kind of more of a pine taste to it, so it's a really very, very different taste than regular ginger. So you can use regular ginger. It's what I'm going to have today because I just ran out of my galangal and have to order more. But if you are really big into Thai curries and you want to try making that and you really want to get an authentic restaurant taste, then you have to go with the galangal. You have to get the Thai ginger. Um, Next thing we're going to put in is some lemongrass. So calls for some diced, but um, I can just put it in the Vitamix. It's going to blend it right up. Uh, you can usually find the lemongrass in the supermarket, regular supermarket, in the produce section. If you can find an Asian supermarket, then they sell just the long stalks of it, and it freezes really well. That's what I do, is I just cut it up into smaller segments and then just freeze it. Makes it so much more convenient. I'm going to add 3 medjool dates to here. to this, just to make it nice and sweet, because that's what the soup is supposed to be. And this is gonna blend all together, and then I'll add the other ingredients to this.
Colin, we had a couple questions about how much ginger and how much lemongrass you added.
Okay. All right. So as far as the ginger, I used about a 2-inch thumb. So yeah, about that much. Um, that's usually, if you see how it's measured in recipes, it's usually 1-inch thumb, 2-inch thumb, about the width, width of your thumb for the root. And then for the lemongrass, I use about a tablespoon. You can definitely get, actually, I think I have some in here. The lemongrass in the tube as well. Sometimes in a pinch, I'll just use the lemongrass paste. And, for that, you might use, it'll be about a tablespoon of that. But, frozen or fresh lemongrass obviously is going to taste stronger than that. So put that back. So I'm going to pour all of the blended ingredients here into the saucepan. Right. So you can see, as of right now, it's a very white, like kind of cream base to it, and that's largely from the coconut manna that's blended in. That makes a nice white creamy base to it. And then I'm going to add the juice of 2 limes. So this soup, you're definitely not going to cook it nearly as long as the other 2 soups. You're not going to cook it for 30 minutes. So in this case, I don't mind putting the lime juice in. It's not really going to cook long enough to cook it off. So there's the limes. And this recipe also calls for a large handful of shiitake mushrooms, if you want, cut into 1/4 inch wide strips. My wife is not a fan of mushrooms really, so I am going to leave those out. So I'm going to add some virtual mushrooms here. You just don't see it. All right. Also, there are 3 scallions diced here. So another mild form of onion here. Okay. And I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of tamari, which you can see here. So tamari is very similar to soy sauce. And I'll actually show you here. It's the same kind of thing as soy sauce. Tamari is, it's a fermented soy liquid. All right. Whereas soy sauce is actually usually fermented soy and other beans and grains, different things together. So if you're gluten-free, then regular soy sauce is problematic, but tamari is usually gluten-free because it's really just soy that has been fermented. So tamari also, it has a little bit of a different flavor than soy sauce. It kind of has like a deeper, sort of richer taste to it. Tamari also adds a really nice umami taste to things. So if there's the 5 different flavors, and umami is sort of like the extra one that's kind of hard to quantify, but it kind of gives things like a deep, rich, salty kind of taste to it. So I'll add that in. There is this is a 16-ounce block of extra firm tofu that is cut into tiny little cubes here. You don't want to get like a big chunk of tofu in your spoonful. Tofu is traditional in this recipe, so if anybody in your house says, "Oh, there's tofu in it," it's traditional. You have to have it. So there's a great source of protein there. You can just have the amount of tofu if you think everybody's going to complain, but I like to get enough in there. So every spoonful, I get a little piece of tofu. Obviously here, um, the tofu itself is not really going to have a strong flavor or really much flavor at all. Um, I like to use the local Hiwa brand made here in Maine. So good. The texture is really super firm. Um, it's my favorite one to use. All right, then we're also going to put in a teaspoon of salt. So get this here and a teaspoon. Go. So, if you're trying to keep the sodium to a minimum here, then definitely stick with the tamari because that is a very natural source of sodium. And then just don't put in the salt. But I'll put in a teaspoon here. I just like how it boosts up the flavor. So this is not a soup that really should be super salty. It's just the salt just kind of hangs out in the back and kind of amplifies the other tastes here. And then also we're going to put in a tablespoon of sriracha. That gives it a little bit of a kick to it. There we go. Use more if you're feeling more, feeling braver than me, but I definitely have a limit. All right, so I'm going to mix all of that together here. And this is what I'm going to cook for about 10 minutes. Um, there's really, there's the shallots in here, there's the garlic, but there's not a lot of it. You can see it a little bit here. Um, it's not really heavy on those, so you don't have to cook it for a whole half an hour to get rid of the raw flavor. It tastes pretty good just as it is without having to cook it for very long. So I'll cook this for about 10 minutes. And then there are a few more ingredients to add to that afterwards. There are three ingredients that if you cook them for very long, then um, like in you want them to be nice and fresh, and you don't want to overcook it. So one of those is mung bean sprouts. So you can see those here. Um, these can be a little tricky to find in supermarkets. Sometimes I have to go to a few different ones to be able to find these in the produce section. So these are not the really thin bean sprouts like you'd have in a salad. These are the thicker mung bean sprouts. And the wacky thing with mung bean sprouts is you look at them twice and they start to go bad. So just don't look directly at the bag. You'll be okay. No, these you buy this and you keep it in the refrigerator. Once you open it up, you really want to use these within like 24 hours. Otherwise, they just like turn right into slime, and you don't want them. But fresh, they add a really crispy consistency. Like it's a nice crispy bite that you would add in here, and then you have 1 cup of cherry tomatoes. So I've cut all of these in half. So again, each spoonful, you're going to get a little piece of tomato in there as well. And you really don't want to cook these for very long, like maybe 5 minutes, because you don't want it to really dissolve in this recipe. You want it to stay nice and firm. So you have the mung bean sprouts, you got the cherry tomatoes, and you have half a cup of chopped cilantro as well. So again, fresh herb, don't need to cook it for very long. I just add this right in. So cook the soup 10 minutes, add those three ingredients, cook it for maybe another 5 minutes at the most, and then serve it just like that, and it's ready. Um, Also with the cilantro, somebody was asking me at the last class, what are some alternatives to cilantro that you can use? Um, Actually, she said, I love cilantro, but my husband hates it. What should I substitute? And I said, your husband. Um, and they still invited me back to teach another class. I don't understand. So if you are a lover of cilantro, there is nothing else, but you can use parsley. It's kind of the same idea, but um, if you've ever had somebody make carob cookies and say that it's chocolate, no, 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 not the same thing at all. So cilantro if you want it, otherwise you don't have to put it in. All right, so that soup I think is we covered everything with that. Does anybody have any questions about that soup or any comments or anything? Okay. We'll give people a minute if you have any questions or anything. Just to make my publisher happy, I will just show this to you here. Healthy Vegan Cookbook is available on Amazon. It is the print and the ebook version is available. There are over 200 different recipes in the book. Like I said, I teach a lot of classes and at different libraries, and so that's really the basis of all of so many of the different classes that I teach are different recipes from that book, trying to look at, like I said, different forms of trying to eat as many whole foods, fruits and vegetables as possible. If you said, if you're going to try and eat like, be good and eat 5 a day, then, you feel like, oh, am I going to eat like salad all day? No, you don't have to do that. Also one thing I always point out in my classes is, I have friends who, they'll have that green smoothie and they'll put kale in it and like all this healthy stuff. And, like they have to plug their nose to be able to get it down because it tastes gross, but it's really healthy, right? But I always say you should never have to plug your nose to eat something healthy, because there are so many great recipes out there that taste so good, so good. You really, I love kale, but it just you put it in a smoothie, and to me it just tastes like liquid lawn. I don't want to drink that. So I have 30 different smoothie recipes in the cookbook, because that's what I like to have for breakfast, especially smoothies that taste like dessert. Actually, in the cookbook, one of the recipes won. Um, there was a contest from Veg News magazine, which, if you're not vegan, then probably never heard of that before. But in the vegan world, it's a really big deal. It's like the magazine, and it was named one of the top 10 smoothies in the world, by Veg News magazine. So that Black Forest smoothie is chocolate and cherry. It tastes so good. It's like dessert, but it's really super healthy. Very, very good for you. Great way to start the day. So I gave a plug for that. And then, of course, smoothies that taste like Girl Scout cookies. I definitely have a sweet tooth. I love me some Girl Scout cookies, but um, for me to be able to have something like that, it's not really, sorry, Girl Scouts, it's not the healthiest thing in the world. But, trying to recreate the different flavors of the Girl Scout cookies, using healthy whole food ingredients, I cracked the code. I was able to figure it out. So that is also available on Amazon as well. Uh, Especially in the time of pandemic and all the political stuff going on, it's just for fun. It's just a fun thing, and so that was a fun project to work on, and excited that that is now out after working on it for a year. I told my kids, I want to make a smoothie cookbook that is smoothies that taste like Girl Scout cookies. Can I experiment on you? And so they sacrificed themselves for the better good, and they were very happy to take that on. So that is available as well. And so also, I'll just plug my website real quick, colincooksvegan.com. There is a calendar of all the different classes that I teach. All the classes that I teach are free for people to be able to watch. Um, and there are a whole number of different classes that I do. So you can just go on to the Google Calendar, and it shows where I'm going to be teaching and all the different themes, and all the different classes that I do. So if you want to see more, then there's plenty more available there as well. All right.
And Colin, we had one final question from Kira. She wanted to know if any of the soups freeze well.
Yes, yes, great point. Thank you. They all do, definitely. So I will have so much soup in my refrigerator, I could not possibly eat it all in the next week. So I definitely freeze it. I will put it in either the pint mason jar or the quart. With these ones, you just want to make sure that these all have a fill line on them, so you don't want to fill it up past about right there. because you don't want it to crack and expand in the freezer. But definitely, like I said, this is the perfect size for lunch for me. Any one of these three soups will freeze really well, and you could even, because of these mung bean sprouts, here that really don't last very long. You could double batch this. You could make a double batch of it, and then you could just, freeze anything that you're not going to use in the first, couple of days. Uh, one thing that I say in my classes is I sort of have a 4-day fresh rule where anytime that you're going to use fresh ingredients like you are in these recipes, it really should only last for about 4 days, right? So, like for example, you have the lemon juice. People say, well, do I have to use the fresh lemon juice? Can I just use the stuff in the yellow bottle? And I say, 4-day fresh rule. If if you juice a lemon and you put it in the refrigerator, it's going to last about 4 days and it's going to start going bad. That's what it's supposed to do. So when you have this like bottle of lemon juice that has been in your refrigerator for 3 or 4 months and it's still good, why is it still good? It's not supposed to be. So there's preservatives, there's chemicals in there to try and keep it to, last a really long time. Those preservatives are not going to preserve you, they're just going to preserve the lemon juice. So, who needs the chemicals? I say skip that. The fresh stuff is going to be so much better anyway. So, these soups should last for about 4 days or so fresh if you keep it in the refrigerator. Beyond that, you want to freeze it and they'll last indefinitely frozen. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question. All right.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Colin. This was really great. And now I'm really hungry for soup.
Well, like I said, perfect weather for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody for being here. And like I said, we'll be back next month, the fourth Thursday in February, the 25th at 7 p.m. with Colin for Unprocess Your Plate.
Yes.
And we'll
Thank you.
see
That was
everyone
great.
then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
See you next month.
Thank you. That was great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Learned.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. So is there anything else that you need to mention from me with me?
I don't think so. I think we're all good. I'm going to send you an email. And I think that's everything, unless you
Okay.
have any questions or anything, or if we want to change anything up for next month.
No, I think I'm good.
Okay.